What happens when a woman spends 30 years building a marriage, only to walk out of a courtroom while her husband and his new partner smile like they've already won, when everyone in the room believes she has lost her dignity, her security, and her place in the life she helped create? The deepest betrayal isn't just the affair, it's discovering that the man she trusted had been quietly preparing for her downfall long before the papers were filed. They say, trust, but verify. Trust may hold a marriage together, but verification protects the truth. When forged signatures and hidden plans replace honesty, should silence be mistaken for weakness? Or should the truth be allowed to speak for itself? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. I stood inside the Suffolk County Family Court facing the man who had been my husband for 30 years, now seated beside another woman as if she had always belonged there. This is where my story begins, in the sterile stillness of a courtroom, moments before a marriage is officially declared over. My name is Asmara Vance Holloway. I'm 59 years old, a financial consultant by profession, a woman who built her life on calculated risks and careful planning. I always believed that with enough discipline and foresight, every storm could be managed, every loss minimized. What I never learned to hedge against was betrayal. The courtroom felt cold and impersonal. High ceilings amplified every faint sound, the shuffle of papers, the quiet clearing of throats, the measured voice of the judge. Dark wooden benches stretched in rows behind me, filled with observers who watch not just a legal proceeding, but the quiet unraveling of a life. Declan sat across from me, composed and confident. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if this were merely another business negotiation. Beside him, Seraphine Cole rested her hand on his knee, in a subtle but unmistakable display of possession. She looked at ease, as though she had already stepped into the role I was being erased from. Behind them, Declan's family exchanged faint, satisfied smiles. When the judge summarized the temporary asset division based on Declan's proposal selling the Beacon Hill house, liquidating part of our joint investment portfolio, and reviewing the beneficiary status of my life insurance policy, I noticed how their expressions barely shifted. To them, this outcome seemed inevitable. I did not argue. I responded only when addressed, keeping my answers concise and professional. Years in finance had trained me to remain composed under pressure, and today that composure was mistaken for surrender. The room interpreted my restraint as defeat. From the back row, my mother leaned forward and whispered softly, "You'll never see them again." Her voice carried a mixture of sorrow and quiet anger. I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that would ease the weight of that moment. When the session adjourned, I gathered my documents neatly stacked inside a brown leather folder, slid my pen into its loop, and adjusted my coat. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. Inside, however, I felt the sting of being silently judged as the woman who had lost everything. I walked toward the exit, aware of the eyes on my back. To them, this was the image of finality, the discarded wife leaving with what little dignity she had left. Just as I reached the door, my attorney, Nolan Pierce, stepped close. His voice was low-measured and precise. They forged the beneficiary transfer. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to pause. My mind immediately processed the implications the life insurance beneficiary documents allegedly changed were fraudulent. I didn't turn around. I didn't give them the satisfaction. But in the glass panel of the courtroom door, I caught a reflection behind me. Seraphine's confident smile had vanished. Declan's posture had stiffened ever so slightly. In that silent reflection, the balance of power shifted. As I stepped into the hallway, a single question echoed in my mind. How did my life lead to this moment? The truth was, this courtroom wasn't just exposing Declan's betrayal. It was also threatening to reveal a secret I had carried for decades, one that had shaped every decision I made, every compromise I accepted, and every silence I maintained. I was not the only one who had hidden the truth in this marriage, and my secret had the power to change everything. To understand why that moment in the courtroom mattered so much, I have to go back 3 decades into the past when everything still looked perfect from the outside. Declan and I were married in 1993 in a small, elegant church in Cambridge. It was a modest ceremony, tasteful and refined, attended by family, close friends, and colleagues who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a stable, successful partnership. We built our life in a classic Beacon Hill townhouse, complete with a curved wooden staircase, polished hardwood floors, and a fireplace that became the centerpiece of countless dinner parties. Our home was known for its warm lighting, thoughtful decor, and the effortless hospitality we extended to guests. Declan thrived as a real estate developer, and I built a strong reputation as a financial consultant. Together, we were seen as the quintessential accomplished couple, disciplined, elegant, and financially secure. There was only one thing: missing children. Declan often explained it to others with a sympathetic tone that we had tried, but I had fertility issues. I never corrected him. I allowed that narrative to stand even when it quietly reshaped how people saw me, successful, composed, but incomplete. The truth was far more complicated and far more painful. Before I met Declan, I was deeply in love with a young architecture student named Adrian. In 1992, I became pregnant. My family, terrified of scandal and determined to protect our reputation, pressured me into giving the baby up for adoption. I was young, emotionally overwhelmed, and isolated. Against every instinct in my body, I signed the papers. I named my daughter Isolde in a confidential birth record, a private act of love in a moment of unbearable loss. She was placed with a family in Vermont. I walked away carrying a grief I never spoke of and a wound that never truly healed. When I married Declan, I carried that secret with me. So when he told the world that I couldn't have children, I let him. It was easier than explaining the truth, easier than reliving the pain, easier than risking judgment. But the past has a way of returning. 10 years ago, at the age of 49, I hired a professional search firm to locate the child I had lost. After months of waiting, they found her Isolde Ray Vance, 21 years old, living in Boston and studying graphic design. Seeing her for the first time as an adult was overwhelming. She had my eyes, my posture, even my way of tilting her head when she listened. I didn't reveal the truth immediately. I approached her carefully, respectfully, building a connection that began with cautious conversations and slowly grew into trust. I never told Declan. Using funds from a personal investment account established before our marriage, I purchased a penthouse in Back Bay through a legal trust structure. Officially, it was a discreet investment property. In reality, it became a safe space for my daughter, a place where she could live comfortably while building her career. My life split into 2 distinct worlds. By day, I was Mrs. Asmara Holloway of Beacon Hill, hosting clients, attending charity events, reviewing financial reports, and maintaining the polished image of a successful marriage. But several times a month, I would stay overnight in Back Bay. I cooked meals for Isolde, listened to her talk about design projects and workplace challenges, and quietly learned how to be part of her life. I kept her photos hidden in a locked drawer in my study. Each image was a reminder of both loss and redemption. Yet while I was managing, my own secret, subtle changes began to surface in Declan's behavior. He started taking more frequent business trips, often to Salem. He spoke enthusiastically about investing in the arts, particularly sculpture. At first, I welcomed the idea. It seemed like a sophisticated expansion of his portfolio. But over time, the trips became more frequent, his explanations more vague, and his emotional distance more noticeable. One evening, while reviewing our credit card statements, I noticed recurring charges at a boutique hotel in Salem. The reservations were listed under Declan's name and occasionally under a second guest. That name was Seraphine Cole. The discovery was quiet, almost mundane in its presentation. Just ink on paper, a line on a statement. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that just as I had been living a carefully managed double life, Declan had been building one of his own, only his was rooted, not in love, reclaimed, but in deception and betrayal. By the end of that night, I understood that our marriage had never been as stable as it appeared. It had been a structure held together by silence, his and mine. And now the first visible crack had a name, Seraphine Cole. After discovering the name Seraphine Cole on that hotel invoice, I could no longer afford the comfort of denial. What began as a quiet suspicion turned into a deliberate, methodical investigation. I didn't confront Declan immediately. Instead, I did what I had always done best. I followed the numbers. I started with the company credit card statements. Declan had never restricted my access. Financial transparency had always been part of our professional dynamic. At first glance, the expenses seemed routine travel, client dinners, development site visits. But patterns emerged. Repeated charges appeared from a sculpture studio in Salem, along with boutique hotel stays that aligned perfectly with his so-called business trips. The frequency was too consistent to be coincidental. I then reviewed archived emails from shared business correspondence. Seraphine's name surfaced multiple times in threads discussing art installations, private exhibitions, and what Declan described as long-term creative investment strategies. The language was polished, but the undertone was unmistakably personal. This was not just business. This was intimacy disguised as collaboration. I chose a quiet evening to confront him. We sat across from each other at the dining table in our Beacon Hill home, the same table where we had hosted countless guests and celebrated milestones. That night, the air felt heavy, stripped of warmth. Declan didn't deny the relationship outright. He described it as emotional, as if that distinction softened the betrayal. He claimed he had felt confined for years, trapped in a marriage defined by routine expectations and the absence of children. Then he shifted the focus to me. He said my control over our finances made him feel like a visitor in his own life. According to him, Seraphine represented freedom, creativity, and a future unburdened by the past. Then came a revelation I hadn't anticipated. Declan admitted he knew I had been making secret trips for years. He didn't know where I went or why, but he suspected I was hiding something, possibly an affair. In his mind, my secrecy justified his own. The accusation struck me like a physical blow. The irony was suffocating. Both of us had been living double lives, yet for entirely different reasons. Not long after that confrontation, I met Seraphine in person for the first time at an art exhibition in Salem. She was composed, elegant, and entirely unbothered by my presence. When our eyes met, there was no guilt, only quiet confidence. She spoke to me politely, almost kindly, but her words carried a sharp edge. She mentioned how life often requires reallocation of resources when new chapters begin. It was a calculated statement blending financial language with personal ambition. In that moment, I realized she didn't see me as a rival. She saw me as a predecessor. Disturbed by the implications, I turned my attention to our insurance and estate documents. As I reviewed the life insurance policies under my name, I found a copied document indicating a change in beneficiary to an unfamiliar corporate entity. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but the pen pressure and flow were subtly off. Years of signing financial documents had made me intimately familiar with my own handwriting. This was an imitation, convincing but not authentic. The realization was chilling. Someone had attempted to alter the legal direction of a significant financial asset tied to my life, but exposing it carried a risk. If a full financial investigation were triggered, it could uncover the penthouse in Back Bay and inevitably Isolde. My most sacred truth could be dragged into a public legal battle. By the end of that night, I stood at a crossroads. I could remain silent to preserve the illusion of dignity and avoid exposing my past, or I could pursue the truth and accept that every hidden chapter of my life might come into the open. For the first time, I understood that protecting my marriage and protecting my identity were no longer compatible goals. Once I understood the depth of the deception, silence was no longer an option. I decided to move first. I filed for divorce before Declan had the chance to initiate it himself. The official grounds were adultery and financial misconduct. In the initial filing, I was deliberate and strategic. I made no mention of the Back Bay penthouse or my relationship with Isolde. My goal was to control the pace and direction of the legal process, ensuring that Declan would be forced to react rather than dictate the narrative. Declan's response was unsettlingly calm. He did not appear surprised. Instead, he countered with a legal motion requesting a comprehensive audit of all marital assets. He specifically asked the court to examine what he described as irregular personal expenditures I had made over the past decade. His composure revealed something important. He had anticipated conflict and prepared for it. Soon after the truth behind his confidence surfaced, Declan had hired a private investigator months earlier. The investigator had documented my repeated visits to Back Bay, noting dates, durations, and the building I entered. What he lacked was context, but the pattern alone was enough to raise suspicion in court. The situation escalated when I received a distressed phone call from Isolde. She told me a man had been asking questions in the lobby of her building, inquiring about the ownership of her unit and the trust associated with it. In that instant, I knew Declan was tracing my financial footprint. I had no choice but to tell Isolde the full extent of the situation. I explained the divorce, the potential asset investigation, and the risk that the penthouse could be scrutinized. She listened with remarkable composure. Then she shared something that sent a chill through me. A few months earlier, a woman named Seraphine had approached her under the guise of an art consultant, expressing interest in the design of her living space and asking subtle questions about property ownership and funding sources. Seraphine had been circling my daughter long before the legal battle began. Determined to confront this directly, I arranged to meet Seraphine at a quiet cafe in Back Bay. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, in stark contrast to the tension beneath our conversation. She didn't deny her relationship with Declan. In fact, she spoke of it with quiet certainty, as though their future were already secured. During our conversation, she made a veiled but unmistakable warning. She suggested that if I continued with the divorce proceedings, aggressively hidden truths had a way of surfacing in court. Her eyes held steady on mine as she spoke, and I understood her message clearly. She knew I had a secret. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough to threaten exposure. Leaving that cafe, the reality of my situation settled heavily on my shoulders. This was no longer just a legal separation or a dispute over assets. It had evolved into a deeply personal battle, one that threatened my identity, my relationship with my daughter, and the truth I had protected for decades. I realized then that I wasn't simply fighting to end a marriage. I was fighting to defend my integrity, my history, and my right to be recognized as Isolde's mother. The conflict had moved beyond divorce. It had become a fight for dignity, truth, and the life I had quietly rebuilt in the shadows. As the legal battle intensified, the conflict moved far beyond the emotional devastation of betrayal. It became a meticulous unraveling of financial deception, one document at a time. With Nolan Pierce guiding the process, I began a comprehensive review of every insurance policy associated with my name over the past 15 years. What initially appeared to be routine due diligence soon revealed a deeply troubling inconsistency. We discovered that two separate records existed regarding the beneficiary of my primary life insurance policy. The official documentation held by the insurance company still listed me as the controlling party with the original beneficiary designation intact. However, the copy submitted by Declan's legal team to the court told a very different story. In that version, the beneficiary had been changed to a corporate trust, an entity that upon further investigation was directly connected to Seraphine. The discrepancy was not a clerical error. Nolan arranged for a detailed comparison of the documents, and subtle but significant differences emerged. Metadata analysis and internal audit trails suggested that the altered document had been introduced through the accounting office that Declan personally oversaw. The implication was unmistakable. The records had been manipulated within an environment under his control. Encouraged by this discovery, we expanded the investigation to include the flow of funds across our joint and auxiliary financial accounts. As a financial consultant, I was accustomed to recognizing patterns, and what I saw was alarming. Over a 3-year period, a series of incremental transfers had been executed from a secondary investment fund, one I had always believed to be secure. Each transaction was small enough to avoid immediate scrutiny, but together they amounted to nearly $1 million. The funds had been redirected into an art investment vehicle associated with Seraphine's professional network. Declan had exercised his co-signatory authority to authorize these withdrawals. The realization was both shocking and painfully ironic. The very financial structures I had designed to protect our future had been quietly repurposed to finance his new life. Despite the mounting evidence against him, I found myself confronting a profound internal conflict. I questioned whether this unfolding catastrophe was in some way a consequence of my own long-held secrecy. For decades, I had lived a divided existence, devoted wife on the surface, yet privately nurturing a relationship with the daughter I had relinquished years before. If the court ordered a comprehensive audit, the penthouse in Back Bay and my connection to Isolde would inevitably come to light. The weight of that possibility compelled me to take a step I had postponed for far too long. I invited Isolde to meet me at her apartment, a space that had always represented both refuge and redemption. Sitting across from her, I finally shared the full truth of my past, the love I once had with Adrian, the circumstances that forced me to give her up for adoption, and the years of silent longing that followed. To my surprise, Isolde received the revelation with remarkable calm. Rather than anger or resentment, she expressed empathy for the impossible choices I had faced. She assured me that our relationship was defined not by the years we had lost, but by the bond we had managed to rebuild. Most importantly, she encouraged me to stop living in fear. She offered to testify in court if necessary, confirming that the penthouse had been purchased using my personal funds and was entirely separate from the marital estate. Her willingness to stand beside me strengthened my resolve. With renewed determination, Nolan and I prepared a formal legal motion requesting an independent forensic examination of the disputed beneficiary documents. Establishing the falsification of my signature would not only protect my financial interests, but could also expose Declan to serious legal consequences. By the end of this stage, I reached a decisive conclusion. I would no longer conceal the truth about Isolde. If the court required it, I would openly acknowledge her as my daughter. The time for silence had passed. Protecting my integrity and our relationship mattered more than preserving the remnants of a marriage that had long since collapsed. The tension reached a new level during the preliminary court hearing, where the opposing sides began to reveal the full extent of their positions. Declan's legal team presented the altered copy of the beneficiary designation, prominently displaying what they claimed to be my signature. The document was introduced as evidence supporting their assertion that I had willingly transferred the policy's benefits to the corporate trust. When it was my turn to speak, I addressed the court with unwavering clarity. I stated unequivocally that the signature was not mine and that I had never authorized any such change. My testimony prompted the judge to order an independent forensic handwriting analysis. The preliminary findings from the appointed expert indicated that the signature bore characteristics consistent with digital replication rather than a genuine handwritten execution. Outside the courtroom, the dynamics between the parties continued to evolve. During a private mediation session, Seraphine's composed demeanor began to fracture. She spoke candidly, asserting that Declan deserved a life free from constraint, framing their actions as a pursuit of happiness rather than an act of betrayal. In her frustration, she inadvertently revealed that she and Declan had already planned to sell the Beacon Hill residence even before the divorce proceedings were finalized. Further investigation uncovered that they had initiated documentation for a new mortgage based on assets that had not yet been legally divided, suggesting an attempt to leverage property that remained under judicial consideration. As the case progressed, Declan's strategy shifted toward exposing my own secrets. His attorney submitted the private investigator's report detailing my frequent overnight stays in Back Bay. Faced with this evidence, I chose transparency over evasion. I informed the court that I had a daughter from a relationship prior to my marriage to Declan. The revelation caused a palpable stir within the courtroom, yet the judge remained focused on its legal relevance. After reviewing the supporting documentation, the court determined that my daughter's existence did not adversely affect the division of marital assets. Since she had been born before the marriage and the penthouse had been acquired through a personal account established independently of our shared finances, the property was deemed separate from the marital estate. Meanwhile, the mounting evidence of document falsification and questionable financial transfers began to erode Declan's composure. The confidence he once displayed gave way to visible anxiety. Recognizing the potential legal consequences, he approached my legal team with a proposal for an out-of-court settlement, offering to withdraw his claims regarding the insurance policy in exchange for halting further investigation. To me, this sudden willingness to compromise spoke volumes. It suggested an implicit acknowledgement that the documents he had presented could not withstand rigorous scrutiny. I found myself standing at a moral crossroads. Pursuing the investigation could lead to criminal charges against the man who had once been my partner, while accepting a settlement might allow both of us to move forward without further destruction. After careful reflection, I made my decision. This was no longer about vengeance or retribution. It was about truth and accountability. I chose not to withdraw the request for investigation. I wanted the facts to be formally established, not only to protect my own integrity, but also to ensure that the narrative of our marriage was not distorted by deception. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was no longer guided by fear or silence. I was prepared to face whatever consequences lay ahead, confident that the truth once fully revealed would finally set both my daughter and me free. The day of the final evidentiary hearing arrived with a quiet intensity that felt heavier than any confrontation before it. As I entered the Suffolk County Family Court once again, I was struck by how familiar the surroundings had become, the high ceilings, the muted echo of footsteps, and the solemn weight of decisions that would permanently alter lives. This time, however, I was not walking in with uncertainty. I was walking in prepared to face the truth in its entirety. The central issue before the court was the authenticity of the beneficiary transfer associated with my life insurance policy. Nolan sat beside me, his calm demeanor reinforcing my own resolve. Across the room, Declan appeared composed, but the confidence he once carried had begun to erode. Seraphine, seated behind him, avoided direct eye contact, her posture noticeably tense. When the forensic document examiner took the stand, the courtroom fell into complete silence. The expert explained that a detailed analysis of the signature on the beneficiary transfer revealed characteristics consistent with digital replication, rather than an original handwritten signature. Microscopic inconsistencies in ink distribution and pressure patterns confirmed that the document had been manipulated. Furthermore, records from the insurance company's internal system demonstrated that no official request for a beneficiary change had ever been submitted by me. Additional digital forensic evidence traced the email requesting the alteration of the beneficiary designation to an IP address registered to Declan's corporate office. This revelation shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom. What had once been framed as a dispute over marital assets now clearly indicated intentional misconduct. Nolan then presented a comprehensive financial analysis outlining a series of transfers from our joint and auxiliary accounts into an art investment fund closely associated with Seraphine. The transactions, executed incrementally over several years, totaled nearly $1 million. When confronted with this evidence, Declan attempted to attribute the discrepancies to accounting errors and the actions of subordinates within his company. His explanation lacked credibility, and the judge openly expressed concern regarding the potential for criminal liability related to financial fraud and document falsification. Seraphine was subsequently required to provide documentation related to a mortgage application she and Declan had prepared prior to the finalization of the divorce. The records demonstrated their intention to leverage the Beacon Hill property, an asset still subject to judicial division, to secure financing for their future together. This evidence further underscored the calculated nature of their actions. In a final effort to undermine my credibility, Declan's attorney redirected attention to my personal history, emphasizing that I had concealed the existence of my daughter for decades. When given the opportunity to respond, I chose complete transparency. I addressed the court with honesty, recounting the circumstances that led to Isolde's adoption and the path that eventually reunited us. I explained that the penthouse in Back Bay had been purchased using funds from a personal account established prior to my marriage and therefore did not constitute marital property. At that moment, Isolde entered the courtroom as a voluntary witness. Her presence brought an unexpected sense of calm. She testified with clarity and dignity, confirming that she had never received any financial support derived from the marital estate and that the property in which she lived was funded solely through my personal assets. Her testimony effectively dismantled the narrative that Declan's legal team had attempted to construct. As the hearing drew to a close, the judge posed a critical question whether I wished to pursue a comprehensive criminal investigation into the fraudulent activities or consider a civil settlement that would resolve the matter privately. The decision carried profound implications. Declan, visibly shaken, offered an urgent proposal through his attorney. He would relinquish all claims to the insurance policy and associated investments if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. I reflected on the years we had shared, the life we had built, and the pain that had followed. My choice was not driven by a desire for revenge, but by the need for truth and accountability. Accepting a private settlement would have allowed the facts to remain obscured, enabling a distorted version of our history to persist. I declined the offer. I requested a formal ruling that would officially recognize the fraudulent actions that had taken place. The judge subsequently determined that sufficient evidence existed to warrant a criminal investigation and granted me full control over the insurance policy and the relevant investment assets. As the gavel struck, signaling the conclusion of the hearing, I felt not triumph but a profound sense of closure. The truth had been acknowledged, and with it the foundation for a new beginning. In the weeks that followed the court's decision, the consequences of the ruling began to unfold with remarkable clarity. Financial authorities initiated a formal investigation into the fraudulent signature and the unauthorized transfer of funds. Declan's business operations were subjected to scrutiny, leading to the suspension of several of his professional activities pending the outcome of the inquiry. The reputation he had spent decades cultivating began to deteriorate under the weight of public and legal examination. Seraphine quietly withdrew from Massachusetts, severing all visible ties to both Declan and the art investment ventures that had once symbolized their shared ambitions. Her departure marked the end of a chapter defined by ambition and deception. The final divorce decree granted me ownership of all life insurance policies and investment accounts held in my name, as well as a substantial portion of the value of the Beacon Hill residence. The court formally recognized the fraudulent conduct associated with the beneficiary documents, ensuring that the official record accurately reflected the truth. The penthouse in Back Bay was confirmed as my separate property, legally insulated from any claims arising from the marriage. Perhaps the most striking transformation occurred within Declan's own family. As details of the financial investigation became widely known, the support they had once offered him dissipated. The subtle smiles that had greeted me during the early stages of the proceedings were replaced by silence and distance. The balance of perception had shifted entirely, reinforcing the notion that truth once revealed possesses a quiet but undeniable power. With the legal matters resolved, I turned my attention to rebuilding my life. I made the deliberate decision to sell the Beacon Hill townhouse. While it had once represented stability and success, it also held memories of silence and compromise. Letting it go allowed me to close that chapter with intention and grace. I carefully restructured my financial portfolio, establishing a secure retirement fund for myself and creating a long-term financial foundation to support Isolde's future endeavors. I chose to rent a smaller apartment located 6 blocks from Isolde's penthouse. The proximity allowed us to nurture our relationship while respecting each other's independence. Our bond continued to deepen, and together we initiated the legal process to formally recognize our mother-daughter relationship. Completing this step brought a profound sense of healing. I was confronted with both regret for the years we had lost and gratitude for the opportunity to move forward together. In a gesture that symbolized trust and partnership, Isolde invited me to become a co-owner in her emerging design studio. The offer was not born of necessity, but of mutual respect, a testament to the relationship we had rebuilt through honesty and resilience. Accepting her invitation represented not only an investment in her future, but also an affirmation of our shared journey. As time passed, I reflected on the path that had led me here. For years, I believed myself to be solely a victim of betrayal. Yet I came to understand that I had also contributed to the complexity of my circumstances through silence and concealment. The distinction lay in intention. I had never sought to manipulate, deceive for personal gain, or appropriate what was not rightfully mine. My actions had been guided by love and fear rather than greed. One quiet morning in my new apartment, sunlight streamed through the windows as I opened a letter confirming the completion of the preliminary financial investigation. The document affirmed that I bore no responsibility for any fraudulent activities. In that moment, a sense of peace settled over me, an assurance that my integrity had been formally recognized. Isolde soon arrived carrying a folder filled with plans for a trip to Ireland, a journey we had often discussed as a way to honor both our past and our future. The trip was not an escape, but a celebration of new beginnings. As I stood by the window overlooking the city, I reflected on the woman who had once walked out of the courtroom under the assumption that she had lost everything. I now understood that leaving that room had not marked a defeat, but a transformation. I had chosen truth over silence, accountability over convenience, and love over fear. At 59, I was finally living a life that was wholly my own. I was legally independent, officially recognized as the mother of my daughter, and free from the divided existence that had defined so many years of my past. For the first time, I was no longer navigating between two versions of myself. I was simply and finally whole.